I've got a guest joining me this week, and David is a friend of mine. David Harmony, he's a friend of mine who does some really good work. He's been helping me with a number of projects. But one of the things that we talk about a lot is our what we call them word swaps. And we picked some of this up from guys like from ÇiTvenNykumh and Peter Dorico. But we've kind of taken this as a part of our everyday conversation. Sometimes it's our posts on Facebook and on social media. And we want to do a show basically kind of zeroing in on what we mean, because I mean, even that expression word swap can, we aren't just talking about, trying to, understand what we call euphemisms, where one word is used, but it really means something else. We're saying there are word choices that we are making that we're not fully understanding the impacts of those words. And so what we're suggesting is that there are probably better choices for those words. And some of them are going to be obvious, but some of them aren't going to be so obvious. So let me welcome David Harmony to Resistance Radio. David, thank you for joining me.
Thanks, John. It's an honor to be here again.
Well, and again, you have been a guest in the past, and we're going to get into it a little bit here. But I'm going to let you take lead, because you've turned this into almost if not a preoccupation, a bit of an obsession. I mean, even the way you type words out, you're always breaking them down and that kind of stuff. So give me how you would explain, perhaps a little differently than I did, what we're talking about with this notion of word swaps.
Well, it's good to be here again. And so I do have a sub-series on my own social media platform. I call it Words Matter. What you say, you become. So the way we talk with one another is the way we behave. It shapes everything. It shapes our values, norms, our culture. And that's one of the reasons I keep encouraging that we as originals, one of my favorite words, we as originals introduce ourselves in our original language much as possible, referring to our system, if it's a clan system, refer to ourselves properly as we normally would. So in my sub-series, I'm tearing apart one word at a time, and I'm offering an alternative word, which I think is better off for us as originals. Like one quick example is, instead of claiming the U.S. government to be mine, ours, that drives me nuts. That is my obsession. I can't stand it when I hear that. Say their system, the U.S. system, right? Quit claiming it by saying my government. So, yeah, I'll stop there for now, but I'm glad to talk through this.
Well, and part of the thing is there, again, going back to my friend ÇiTvenNykumh, he once asked the question, did tribes exist before Europeans showed up here? Because that's not our concept. I mean, it's not our word, obviously. And of course, look, we're bound we're constrained a little bit because we're using English even as we do the show. So I'm not ignoring what some might view as some level of hypocrisy because of that, because this is the medium that we're using. We're using technology that may not be a part of our original culture and that kind of stuff. But regardless, I think there are words in the English language that we use that need to be thought through a little bit more. And when Stephen asked the questions, did tribes exist before Europeans showed up here? He follows up that question and say, do they exist now? And if so, do they only exist because the word existed? So, as you said, we become these words that we accept. And so, I mean, I think that's part of the problem that we have. If we embrace these words, I mean, and the obvious word like tribes is one of them, but the other one, of course, is Indians. This word has been imposed upon us. It is a misnomer. It is a mistake. It is, and in many ways, not to berate people from India who are rightfully using that word to describe themselves. The imposition of the word Indians comes from just ignorance, out of ignorance, but it seems to have lasted. And so even today, even though the word by itself sometimes isn't used to describe us, we say, we hear people, the government uses American Indian or Native American. None of these words are appropriate. And I'm glad that you use a word like originals. I sometimes use the word native because I say it native peoples or original peoples. Because again, we get sucked into this notion of being a tribe or a tribal member rather than just being a person. I mean, tribes aren't clubs. They aren't organizations. They aren't, something that you signed up for. And I think these words like member, tribal member, or enrolled tribal member, all of these things are framed within a system of domination. And that's part of the reason that we're addressing these words in the first place. So, again, I prefer to use something fairly benign that may not be terribly descriptive when I say native or native peoples. I think your choice to use words like original peoples has a little bit more definition to it, because you're saying something. Native still can be a bit of an obscure word, but
like native plant, right? Are you speaking of native plants to the origin, or what are you actually saying?
What I will say is, just like if I use the word Indian or Native American or American Indian, people know what I'm talking about. I just choose not to use that nomenclature. And so when I use a word like original people or native people, I'm taking away essentially what is almost an institutional or a political connotation associated with that. So that's, again, some of the word swaps that I choose. But I'm right there with you on the thing about using words like possessives, ours versus theirs, and that kind of thing. I think it's important that we distinguish, because look, I think there are some really, really well-educated, probably well-intended people who I can listen to and think, man, this guy's really getting it. This guy or this lady's really getting it. And then all of a sudden they'll do one of these, well, our founding fathers or our Constitution or our government, and I'm like, man, you just lost me right then, because now you're one of them. The moment you claim that system as yours with your possessive, you've just created a distance between me, who won't accept their system as my system. And look, let me be clear here. I'm not crazy about so-called, and again, I'm going to use the word tribal government either, because those are manufactured. Those are produced by a system of domination from the United States. So one of the other words that I won't use is the word citizen. And I don't just reject the notion of being a U.S. citizen or American citizen. I won't even say I'm a citizen of the Mohawk Nation. I just said three words right there: citizen, Mohawk, and nation. None of those words are ours. Even the word Mohawk isn't ours. I mean, our word is ﷺ. It means the people of the land of Flint. But I don't consider myself a citizen, because the word citizen implies an allegiance to a government. And there are no native governments that I would say that I have. And I mean, when I say this, I'm talking about institutions here. There's no native government or non-native government institution that I have an allegiance to, that I have a debt to, and that I feel like they have a debt to me. I mean, I think there's debt associated with I guess injury and that kind of stuff. But in terms of feeling like I have to have a government protect me, and I'm going to get make a pledge of allegiance to that government for that protection, no, that won't happen. Now, native peoples, original peoples, we had governance, but we were the government. And it's not just it's not just a trite expression to say, we the people, or, the people, it always cracked me up when you listen to a court proceeding and they say it's the people against this defendant or whatever else. No, it isn't. It's the cops who built up the case. It's the prosecutor's process. It's not the people bringing the charge. So there's these expressions that get used, but they aren't accurate. But when I say that we, as native peoples, original peoples, that we were the governing system, because it wasn't an institution, it's what we did. That's different. So I don't have to pledge allegiance to an institution, and that's kind of my point. So I have an aversion to using the words like citizen. Even the word nation, it's bound in these definitions of borders, oftentimes military, obviously government, and that kind of thing. So when I say that I'm Mohawk or Gunyaga, I'm not saying that I'm a citizen or have some sort of allegiance to whether it's a traditional council or one that claims to be traditional, or whether it's a tribal council, a band council, or a Fed rect. That's another one of my words, but we'll get into that. But that's kind of my little rant on just some basic, and these aren't ground rules that I'm imposing on somebody else. I'm just saying these are choices, and when you practice these choices, they become natural, right? So now I don't have to think about what to call myself or how to address somebody. I don't have to think about, what's the appropriate way to ask somebody something. No, I mean, it becomes second nature.
Yeah. The only thing I would add, John, is the words operate together, and they effectively worked as shortcuts. Sorry, I'm getting a little echo. It's hard to...
No, you're fine.
They're shortcuts, and they're meant for efficiency. And you have to ask towards what goal. If it's about conformance, don't ask, don't tell, don't challenge. So that becomes our culture. If you could dare label that a culture. When I was looking up the definition of nation a second ago, it says above all else. That's not who we are as originals, right? We know that we are here last. We are the last species on this planet. We should have reverence, honor, respect for all our relatives. So just labeling yourself as a people and nation is making you first and above and beyond all your relatives. It doesn't work for me.
Or it casts you in the past. That's the other problem I have with words like that expression, First Nations, because so we were first and then what? I mean, because clearly there are, and that's not just used primarily, or exclusively, but primarily on the Canadian side. There's no question how Canada views Native peoples. They don't view Native peoples as nations. They say those words just to be, maybe to placate a little bit and that kind of stuff. But they view everybody within their fixed borders as theirs, the same as the United States tries to do here. The other thing that I have to confront oftentimes are those who say, well, I'm a dual citizen. I'm a Cherokee and I'm an American. Okay, but what does that even mean? Because the United States doesn't recognize our quote-unquote citizenship to our quote-unquote nations. They don't. They only recognize one thing. They passed a law in 1924 declaring we were theirs, and they've been claiming us ever since. Now, they know that there's problems. I mean, they knew that we didn't, that we weren't included in the 14th Amendment. They knew even this Declaration of Citizenship in 1924. They knew it was still weak. I don't know. Most people are familiar with this, but another decade later, they had the Indian Reorganization Act, where they once again tried to redefine us and that kind of stuff. So that's them doing it. This is none of us declaring what our identity is. And even, about a decade or so ago, there was a court case. Salazar was the Interior Secretary. And there was a court case involving going, and we're going to get into this idea of reclamation, land reclamation, but it was about the fee to trust system. And what came out of that case was the determination that if you were not just recognized, but under the jurisdiction of the United States in 1934, this is the same time as this is the Indian Reorganization Act, you cannot utilize the fee to trust system. So let me say it again. So they're acknowledging that in 1934, regardless of their amendments, their Citizenship Act, and the Reorganization Act, they're acknowledging that there were those of us who were not under the jurisdiction of the United States in 1934. See, and they don't want to necessarily fully acknowledge what these comments mean. But you can't. It could not be more clear. Put it that way. If you're saying if you weren't under, and it's kind of an irony in all of this, because under this rule that they determined, you've got to document that you were theirs in order to get your land back. So if you weren't theirs, They're saying you can't get your land back, even in this rudimentary, process called fee to trust. So, again, there's so many tangents that we can jump off onto with every one of these conversations. But Dave, you've got some specific word swaps, and if you got other thoughts you want to add to this, by all means. But I wanted to hear some of the stuff that you've kind of been noodling over for the last several years.
Well. So we touched on original. One of my favorite episodes that you did. You talk about is God dead? Was he ever alive? Right. So you touched on the concepts, and that's really what they are. Beliefs taken and accepted as fact around creator, creation versus how we likely reference that in our original languages. We did not have the concept of creator and creation. We probably didn't even utter great mystery. Again, more English words. We just sat quietly in reverence for all of our relatives. And then that took on other terms like spirit, right? Spirit comes from Christianity, and they swapped our great reverence for the great mystery, the thing that we could never fully understand, and they swapped it with great spirit. And then that created a bridge back to God. So I'll stop there for a moment. How do you feel about that?
And those are good points. I mean, because one of the things in my culture, what we say is, we will not know the name or the face or the place that power dwells. We will just see the evidence of the power of creation. So we talk about the power of creation, which is not the same thing as, humanizing that power and calling it a creator. And in fact, in most of our original languages, there is no word for creator. I mean, especially with the or meaning a little bit more of a masculine overtone to it. We talk about acknowledging creation, and again, do we have words that directly translate to creation or power of creation? No, we have to. We've got to delve into it a little bit to get there. So yeah, we don't humanize or deify that power. In fact, the fact that we in our culture say we will not know the name or the face of or the place that power dwells is an acknowledgement that that's almost a folly. To even go there, to even try to to wrap your head around how these things come to be, rather than just acknowledging and then following the pattern of creation, following the patterns of nature, so you can live with it. Because the more you try to define it, the more you try to own it and label it, the more you're trying to control it. Now you started to go into another area, and one of the things I always talk about is the difference between belief and knowledge. Now, when you're young, you are being taught or told a lot of things. But until you experience some of those real world experiences, those circumstances, the first thing that you're being inundated with are things that somebody else is telling you. So those become your beliefs. Until you have a real life experience and understand, oh, that's what he was talking about. Now I know. See, before you only believed, or maybe you didn't believe, because as parents, we know sometimes our kids kind of look at us a little bit side eye here. They don't necessarily agree with what we're saying. They don't necessarily believe what we're telling them is true. Or if they are too gullible and they believe it just straight off without questioning it. See, the whole idea of being taught something, being told something, and the really astute elders would always tell you, question everything. Dissect it. That's why my friend ﷺ always says, my grandmother used to tell me to dissect everything, take it apart, and understand it. And I might get it wrong. And you and I, David, you and I may get some of these concepts wrong. So I don't put the challenge out just to be, confrontational, but I can appreciate those people who are willing to perhaps challenge something that I've said, because that's how you delve farther into the conversation. If somebody says, "Well, I don't think you got that right," and then they'll explain what their position is. But you didn't quite get what I said. Or I'll say, you got a good point. So I don't have to usually retract a whole lot of things, as you're aware of, David. You've been following my work for a number of years here. There's probably not a whole lot of things I had to go back and do a correction for. And it's not because I don't get things right. My wife would not necessarily agree with me on that one. So just so you know.
Sure. Yeah. As would most wives with their husbands. Wink, wink. So let me affirm and say a couple additional things there. I think the reason people don't catch you in a misstatement, never a lie, is because it's lived experience. And only until you've really lived it a few times, several times with others, and they've affirmed you, right? The people of your community, you don't proclaim anything, right? It's got to be a lived, shared experience, which we reflect on together, learn from, and adapt our behaviors. That is solid understanding. And I don't like this word faith because I think it gets misconstrued as belief. No, have faith that you will get the experience, that you will learn. Be curious. Be excited to go out and have that firsthand experience. Hope, faith, belief, they all get intertwined and they get replaced by what our guardians tell us. And so let me offer a quick example. I was raised with contradictions from my dad. On the positive side, he would very frankly tell me, "Kid, I don't know. Let's go out today and learn how that works. Dad, why is the sky blue?" Okay, I have no idea. We didn't have Google in the 70s. So we would have to go out to the library and do some research. And, you could take that to any other domain, any other topic. But where my dad introduced severe contradictions, and I had to really have strong internal convictions, not to just believe, was when it came to religion. He would say, well, with his Christian upbringing, this is what he was told. Now he's telling me. And I think that's part of the convention that's been applied to us. The reason we personify into a belief and anchor it through the man is because we're living in a patriarchy. My dad had immediate authority in my family because he was the man of the family. He was the dad. And so when he said how things were, as a kid, you were inclined to just kind of take it as truth. Thankfully for me, I didn't. I was a pain in his butt. Over the years, I challenged him in Bible class from age 5, and I got kicked out very often, challenging the contradictions and say versus do kind of scenarios. I don't see you guys actually doing this, so why is that? I'll stop in a second, but I just wanted to kind of reinforce that key point. I think within the U.S., I hate the word culture. I don't see a culture in the U.S. I see some belief systems. And one of the beliefs is you follow what your dad says in this patriarchy. And what's his basis? Well, his ultimate father, right? My dad still repeats at breakfast quite often. I have faith in my father. It's like, okay, well, as an original, I don't. My faith is in all my relatives, my daily lived experience, and what I learned from that in every present moment. So,
well,
I'll leave it at that.
And to define, faith, by definition, is belief without proof. That's what it means. That's when you look it up on, in a dictionary, that's what faith is. And systems of faith are beliefs without proof. Now, what you're describing is in terms of having a belief in that something is going to occur based on proof is not exactly, again, it's not the same thing as faith. If you say, I'm going to put these seeds in the ground and I have faith that, that the plant is going to grow. Well, it's because it's been doing it for tens of thousands of years. Not because, not because your faith is going to make it come out of the ground, your prayers or whatever else. You might do certain things culturally to acknowledge or be grateful for the fact that these systems, these natural systems, have existed since time immemorial. That's not the same thing as prayer. So even things like that, when people burn tobacco or sage or cedar or whatever they do, there's a tendency that it gets reduced to this notion of prayer. And oftentimes these things are associated with a practice that that either has some medicinal value or symbolic value, which is different than spiritual value. And so these are some of the examples. So when we talk about word swaps, I'm not going to talk about faith and belief a whole lot. I will talk about being taught something, and even that one, that's another word, to teach. The idea isn't that I'm going to teach you so you know something. I'm going to teach you to bring you to a place of knowledge. I'm going to bring you to a place to receive the information that's around you. And that's different than saying, no, you've got to believe what I just told you. I just gave you the answer. That's the answer. Don't question it. No. All I'm saying is allow me to bring you to a place, intellectually, to where when you experience something, you say, now I understand. Because that's it. It's understanding.
And if I could affirm, maybe a better word than teach would be provide. I'm going to provide you some experiences which in my own storyline have proven this to be true. They may not wind up being true for you, kid, or whoever it is you're trying to help.
Yep.
But I'm going to provide you from my own direct experience, a chance for you to experience, and then you take from that what you will. You create your own reality, your own facts. Yes.
I mean, I've had some life experiences that I don't advise anybody else to have. Yeah, so I'm approaching my later 60s at this point. So I've got a lot of lived experiences, and some that nobody else will ever have. And that doesn't mean that there aren't lessons that they can learn within their experiences that perhaps I had to learn a little bit harder, a harder way, so to speak. But that's just it. When you sometimes, storytelling, for instance, storytelling is not the same thing as reciting history. And that's part of the problem with the whole Bible, right? Everybody wants to take that as some sort of historical document instead of a series of stories that people can extrapolate whatever value they want out of those things. But when we tell stories like our creation story, or even the story, the origins of the Haudenosaunee in terms of what people perceive as the current existence of the 5 or 6 nations and that kind of stuff, operating under the 콴Η, the story associated with that is more of a story than a history lesson, because we want there to be an acknowledgement and a better understanding about things like, in the story of the creation of the 콴Η, they talk about Taradaho or Aradaho being this evil man, and how he is brought into a place to have a specific title within the Haudenosaunee. But if without having that story associated with redemption and understanding that, yes, even somebody who has perhaps done terrible things in their life, everybody has the capability of doing good, and frankly, man, more so than any other part of creation, has a propensity to doing evil. In fact, I would argue that evil is a man-made construct. It doesn't exist in nature. I mean, look, disease isn't evil. It just is. I mean, fierce storms, I mean, these aren't evil things. They are just part of nature. But we have a tendency to try to do this, cast everything in either a good or evil or positive and negative connotation, instead of understanding things for what they really are. Most of the time in nature, most of it is a quest of nature, including us, to maintain balance. That's what nature is all about. That's what it's all about.
It's about balance, yeah. And when it comes to human beings being out of balance, are they doing so knowingly? Is it ignorance, or is it just willful resistance or imbalance? That's what gets labeled evil if it gets taken too far out of balance. But Pre-contact, we didn't have that concept. It's just that's somebody who can't think.
Well, but
They're out of
I mean,
balance. And
but
so what would we do
nature
with them, John? We'd probably cast them out of
nature has a
community. So,
tendency to respond to adversity and conflict, and and conflict exists in nature. So look, we know what happens with drought. We know what happens with flooding. We know, I mean, sometimes the ecosystems can get thrown out of balance, and then they continue to be in conflict until some level of balance. And that balance that is created may not look the way like it did before. So, we see things like invasive species. Yes, we threw something out of balance by bringing a species of plant or animal into an area that that didn't have a natural system of checks and balances. So we throw it out of whack, and eventually, look, whether it's a plague or an infestation, these things ultimately will balance themselves out. And of course, man thinks that we can play quote unquote God, and that we can fix everything we screw up. And oftentimes the fix is more harmful than the original mess up in the first place.
yeah, what does Genesis 1:28 say? Go forth and dominate as a human being. As a Christian human being, this is your sandbox. Go do it.
Yeah.
Multiply.
Yeah. Domination over the creatures of the earth, right? I mean,
Yeah. So from the word go, they were promoting imbalance. Yeah, it's interesting to me.
Yeah.
So we have to try to strike that word evil. I hear that a lot on Indigenous podcasts. This native brother or sister of ours is evil. It's like, nope. What you're doing is you're going further into their illusion. The first word swap, right?
Yeah.
Not our illusion, their illusion, the U.S. illusion. So yeah, we have to rein these things back in and use the words properly.
Well, and the problem with labeling something, a person or a specific thing as evil, you're not understanding how it got there. I mean, there are those elders that I can speak to today that explain, even in a story of ﷺ, how he gets to that place. How did, when they tell that story, oftentimes it cuts to the part where he's doing these terrible things, right? They don't say, how did he get there? They don't explain, even within a story, that there is a backstory. So when you look at somebody like that is easy to point to, somebody like Donald Trump, how does he get there? I mean, and how, like in the United States, where they claim this, this beautiful system of governance with infallible checks and balances, where are they? I mean, and so you realize that when you look through history, and of course I've done with the run up to and now the passing of the Declaration of Independence anniversary, I've done a pretty thorough job explaining what some of these people were really all about, including guys like Thomas Jefferson. And so when we want to just label somebody as good versus evil, and you don't want to balance their behaviors and their attitudes, you can miss the whole point. Because the thing is that we as all parts of creation, we are responding to the environment around us, to the environmental stimulus, so to speak. So if we don't see something and say, I'm not going to do that, then we're saying, you know what, he got away with that, I think I can do that. So that's what happens that's what human nature does, right? They push an envelope that may be not a good envelope to push. It's one thing to be, creative and I'm enamored by this notion of design and creativity and that kind of stuff. But some things don't need to be created. Atomic bombs, for instance, totally unnecessary. But there you go. Go ahead, Dave.
You just touched on another one that strikes a nerve. I can't stand that word human nature. Again, quite often I'm out to breakfast with my dad and he's painting with broad strokes. Human nature, we're all the same. We're all evil, this and that. I don't mean to paint my dad into a corner or like he's a bad guy. He's just regurgitating the language that's been applied to him for 86 years. No, we're not naturally this way. Modern society might be this way, especially in the United States. I had to add a bunch more words, right? But when I talk with my dad, I try to honor him by reinforcing, Dad, you are Numunu, you are Numana, right? You're not Comanche, so that's another word swap. You are not Apache, you're not the enemy, you are Inde and Dad, you're Anigitawagi, you're not Cherokee. You're not some utterance from the Muskogee, you are the Anigitawagi. So Dad, also honor who you were before contact, because we did not behave this way. A lot of the things we label human nature were not actually us in the Western Hemisphere. So
it's learned behavior.
Modern problems. Yep.
And let's be clear. Christian ideology suggests that man is inherently evil, and it is only through the grace of God that they can maintain some purity, or again, that word grace. That's just a bizarre concept. I mean, and the idea that it's funny that the idea of baptizing and that kind of stuff. Some religions, they don't baptize, and which is this, ritualistic way of trying to clean away original sin, as they call it, because they say you were born evil, right? Some churches, like the Catholic Church, they baptize a baby. That baby's not making a commitment to anything. I mean, at their christening, that baby is not making a commitment to belief systems or anything else. But so it's really kind of a bizarre thing that you're going to have this belief that says you are born with sin, and it is only going to be through the grace of God. I mean, man.
Merely by being born of woman. If you follow the Orthodox line of thought there, which is just bizarre, because last I checked, our mother, the grandmother called Earth, she births everything we see, and that helps us to exist. And you're calling that a sin too? Well, apparently, because God was supplanted above Earth and said, "Go forth and dominate," right? Yeah. So it's an interesting belief system.
Well, and that's why I agree with you. And we have a story, we call the creation story, and in that story, there's it's a story again. There's a right-handed and a left-handed twin, and the tendency is to always associate right and left with good and evil. I mean, I don't know if you know the Latin word for left is sinister. It's literally spelled sinister. That's what left is in Latin, sinister. And of course, right is called dexter, which means like dexterity and all the things that are good, right? But in our story, there's a tendency even for Native people to view the left-handed twin as the evil one, and the right-handed twin is the good one. And what the left-handed twin in the story does is the story has these guys creating stuff. They're not gods, they're not the god, but it talks about the right-handed twin creating a body of water, for instance. And the left-handed twin says, no, it needs rocks. And so it's not just a smooth, placid stream. It's got rapids to it. And what do the rocks do? The rocks purify the water. It has the right-handed twin creating berries and plants that bear fruit, and the left-handed twin puts thorns in them. Well, why? Well, because the thorns are the only thing that allow those berries to fully mature. So there's things that in the story, if it's told correctly, it's about balance. Again, back to that. It's about balance. It isn't about what is good and what is evil. I mean, if you ever look at in the wild and you find these areas where there's berry brambles, there's an entire ecosystem of life that lives beneath those, small animals and rabbits and that kind of thing that use that whole system for protection and for defense and that kind of stuff. So it's what some people, yes, is it inconvenient if you stick your arm into a berry? I fell into a patch. I told you that a couple of weeks ago. I fell into a hole. It was not a pleasant experience.
It looked pretty rough.
Yeah, I felt like somebody just dragged me through barbed wire. But that was my fault. I mean, those berry brambles didn't attack me.
They weren't evil. Yeah.
So, but no, I think this whole notion that we're going to look at various things in nature And look, nature is responsive. Many of the diseases that afflict man and others are due to the activities of man. Look, radioactivity causing cancer. There wasn't a whole lot of radioactivity that people were exposed to until man decided it was time to play with nature and the idea of splitting atoms and that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a bizarre world when you think about it.
And John, this is a huge leap of faith, and I'll play devil's advocate. Yes, I'm having fun
Yes,
with
you
words. But are we callous? Are we so cold as to suggest that the plight of modern humanity is just about rebalancing? Why should millions of people have to die in world wars? Why, with whatever's coming next with this AI stuff, right? And our water supply and the climate shifts and all the suffering that's likely coming, surely that's evil. That's the doing of one or a few people. Dare you say it's just a rebalancing of humanity on Earth to maybe go back to being more in balance with more than human being existing?
Well, I think
I'm teeing it up for you.
I think the impacts of nature responding to the imbalance that we create is one thing, but make no mistake about it, war is not nature, and it's not natural. I mean, when you talk about intentional destruction, the mass destruction of weapons of mass destruction, dropping an atomic bomb on two cities in Japan, there was nothing natural about that. And the fact that there would be a legacy of death and destruction that would follow, that was nature responding to what man did. So when we know that we've done some things that inadvertently cause climate change or inadvertently, cause sickness and illness because we've created forever chemicals or that we've, created drought and, and extreme weather situations, I'm not giving man a pass for the accidental deaths. But those are clearly different than a world where dominant powers are obsessed with weapons of mass destruction and inflicting conflicts throughout the globe. And there's no country that does it more than the United States. And I know
we're back to the belief system.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Bring on the end of days is one of the things we're hearing in some of the crazy online activity. Your belief system will get you killed. You're supposed to use this thing in your skull, and you're supposed to use it as a good mind unified with as many other people as you can. You're supposed to act in thoughtful, traceable ways, and you're supposed to think, did that help or hurt us? Maybe we shouldn't do that anymore. But instead, we've got people operating in isolation, not thinking, acting out of own selfish greed and such. And they're causing a lot of suffering for others who were not allowed to participate in that missed opportunity for shared learning, right? If they would have consulted with us, should we invent this thing called the nuke? Do you think it would exist?
Well, I think even people who were involved in it, were.
More broadly, society, knowing that society could die.
Yeah. Well, and it's not just that. I mean, there are any number of things that science is pursuing. Everything from manipulating birth and genetics and that kind of stuff. All I can say is just be careful what you wish for, what you end up with. Yeah. I mean. Look, there's this constant ongoing conversation about the perils, the potential dangers of artificial intelligence. And, I remember when I was probably still a teenager, there was this thing that we called the moment of singularity. Is that still an expression they use today? Are you familiar with that one?
Yeah, they're searching for it, but they don't realize they're already in it. But yeah,
the moment of singularity is this notion that when the machines become awake, essentially, when or one of the other definitions was when man exceeds its biological limits, to the point where, again, artificial intelligence, robotics, and that kind of stuff become the dominant, even whether it's human enhanced artificial intelligence and robotics, or whether it becomes unnecessary for the for the frailty of a human being to be involved. I mean, this is what is considered that moment of singularity, and you know, I've had to explain this to my kids as they grew up. Look, a ball rolls down a hill until it comes to rest. But while it's rolling, sometimes it's hard to stop, or a boulder or whatever. It's hard to stop, and we are in a place where there's a lot of things that are rolling downhill that man seems powerless. Even if they started that ball rolling, started that rock rolling, they seem powerless to stop. So, and we don't always know where it's going to roll, right?
What kind of power? Where if you're bowing to money and commerce, then yeah, you have no power, because logic would say you got to let it roll.
Yeah.
Because that's going to bring us some money. But no, you actually have natural power to intercept, but we won't, because we don't see our natural power anymore. John, I wonder if we wouldn't conclude on the favorite topic of ours, rights versus responsibilities.
Well, and it gets to another word that I have become increasingly discontent with, and that's the word sovereignty. Because sovereignty... You know, we've somewhere along the line, we decided we wanted to try to own that word. But to be clear, the word sovereignty comes from this notion, and it's got a French origin to it. But it's this notion that the monarchs of Europe, through the church, and there was only one church at the time, could claim that God bestowed power to certain families to rule over others. I mean, it's one of the biggest lies ever told. One of them.
And the hierarchy is born.
So sovereignty, the sovereign was always the king, declared and confirmed by the Pope. What is it? And the Pope is supposed to be this infallible, representation of God in man's form or whatever. So that's where the word sovereignty comes from. So when we take that word and we use it and we call it tribal sovereignty, or we say that my nation is sovereign. Well, what does that mean exactly? Because here's the problem with the word sovereignty. It's about power. It's about who has it and who has it over who. So it's about power over land. It's a power over people, power over resources. When you say that, we're asserting sovereignty, what you're saying is you're asserting power. And I would much rather use words like autonomy, if you're going to use, again, an English word. In Mohawk, we say ﷺwitawi. We have these the power to carry ourselves, right? That's what we say, so we carry ourselves. But autonomy is completely different than sovereignty. Autonomy is about, again, the right and the responsibility to do right and to make decisions. Sovereignty is really, again, it's about power and who has it. And that's why when people say, well, I want to defend my nation's sovereignty, well, I would rather defend our right to a free and independent existence, which is essentially what autonomy is. So when we talk about things like power is dangerous if it doesn't have a responsibility. So when we talk about, again, rights and responsibility, I oftentimes hear people say, well, I want to understand what the ÇKayēnRāGoa says, because I want to understand what our rights are. Well, that's not what the ÇKayēnRāGoa is about. It's not about it's about what your duties are, what your responsibilities are. Because if you fulfill your responsibilities, you don't even have to have a conversation about what your rights are. Because part of the, what we talk about with responsibility is not infringing upon somebody else's ability to live, to pursue their own lives. So I don't know, but jump in on this one.
Spot on. Power is another word swap. You're claiming unnatural authority as a human being over everything. And last I checked, John, I think the earth owns us. If anybody owns anyone, the earth owns us. Until Elon and his crew figure out how to live on Mars, we can't live without the earth. So it's not even about ownership, property, title. That's another topic we can get into. I have a responsibility to live respectfully at a minimum. If I'm doing that well, I'll likely find a reverence and awe for everything as it responds to me, as it responds to my
Actions.
support,
Yeah.
right? My indiscriminate care and concern for everything around me. I look at my backyard, I'm taking care of it. And it's true. I've got 80% more biomass just in my own yard than I do my neighbors, right?
Mm-hmm.
There we go again. The indigenous people taking care of life. And I thrive as a result. I have vegetables. I have all my relatives joining me on a daily basis. So it's a good life. And I think that's the ultimate thing. We don't know who we are. We lack purpose. We have no responsibility to prove that we are living in balance. Without a purpose, we do these crazy things, and we say, "Well, I'm the tyrant in this town." So yeah, and what I see is a lot of unnecessary suffering because of that detachment from Earth, from our mother, right? Yeah. When we say Earth, we're one step removed. When we say the Earth, now it's like we're in outer space. You should just say, "I'm happy to be here, man." You don't even need extra labels.
Well, and again, I understand doing this program today, we're not going to necessarily change everybody's vernacular. But I just want people to think about what the words they say really mean, and understanding that when you say them, you may not mean them to you may not mean for them to represent what somebody else may receive. So I think trying to use a certain vernacular, again, the caution is try not to become what they say you are. Because like you said, words matter. Words matter.
Tribalism.
And well, I mean, and it's funny when I suggest that I take offense to the word tribe. They say, why? What's wrong with that word? I said, well, look how it's used. I mean, in the world, when they suggest somebody has gone tribal, they don't mean that they somehow became sophisticated. Tribalism isn't about intelligence and sophistication. It's about primitive behavior. That's the way it's used. It's never used in anything other than a pejorative. And when somebody says, "Oh, but we don't mean that when we say it to you," when we call you a tribe or a tribal business or a tribal government, we don't mean to be insulted. Yeah, but it means it's an insult every place else. It doesn't even make sense that when they apply it to us, that somehow it's going to have a different meaning. No, these are words that we should strike them, and in terms of applying them to ourselves. I mean, I'm not saying. I think there's a place to use the word tribe, but oftentimes even that is oftentimes meant as a pejorative, whether you're talking about the animal kingdom even. So I think I think there are words that we need to be careful on how we use them and that kind of stuff. And that's my caution. David, look, I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank you for having this conversation. We're going to continue to do this. And look, if you follow my work on social media, you're oftentimes going to see, David's commentary and some of his word swaps that become part of that conversation. I think it's important that people understand that language matters, words matter, and the labels that become the definition or the identities associated with Native peoples oftentimes have been a gross manipulation, and it's really born out of a system of dominance and a system of domination over Native peoples, more so than our history, our cultures, and our ideologies. So I want to thank you, David, for joining me and being a part of Resistance Radio. Yahweh. I'm John Kane, and this is Resistance Radio. Yahweh.